Okay. Hi, everybody. As Tammy said, I'm Scott Brassart, filling in for Rob sort of tonight. Tammy and I together will fill in for
There you
Rob.
go.
But I thought one of the things that a lot of people who are new to sexual recovery, and then a lot of partners even who've been around for a while, don't really have a great grasp on or know anything about sometimes is how we define sexual sobriety. Um, if if I'm an alcoholic, and I am, by the way, and a drug addict for that matter, as well as a sex addict, but my alcohol and drug addiction sobriety is super easy, none, zero, total abstinence, no questions, no debates, no nothing. As a recovering sex addict, it's a whole different story, um, because it's much more like an eating disorder. You can't not eat, you're going to die. The trick is to learn to eat in ways that are healthy for you. And the trick with sexual recovery is learning how to be sexual in ways that are healthy for you, or for me, in my case. One of the things that clinicians will do with addicts who are new to recovery is kind of walk them through all of their sexual behaviors from the very start. The first time you had sexual thoughts, the first time you had a crush, the first time you masturbated, the first time you kissed a girl or a boy or whatever, all the way up through, prostitutes and pornography and whatever else has been going on. That's causing problems in life. And then the addict and the therapist together can take a really deep, good, hard look at that and say, this behavior is a real problem for me. And this behavior is a real problem for me. And this behavior is a slippery behavior for me. It's not really what's screwing my life up, but it leads me to stuff that's screwing my life up. A lot of times things like pornography and masturbation fall into that category, especially for guys. And then based on all of that information and a lot of discussion between the therapist and the addict, and usually if there's a group therapy happening, it'll be discussed in group therapy as well. We come up with what Rob refers to as a boundary plan. Some of the 12-step recovery programs call it a circle plan. And it's a 3-tiered plan. There's your bottom line behaviors, no prostitutes, no pornography, no affairs, and no whatever. The 4, 5, 6, however many things that are just absolute no-nos. That's your inner circle, or it's your bottom line boundary. Then we have what we call a middle circle or a middle boundary. These are things that are slippery. Driving through a certain neighborhood where that there are, drug dealers and prostitutes, or stopping at a certain bar on the way home, or staying late at work by yourself if you've had an affair with a coworker, or going online while nobody else is in the house or nobody else is in the room. Things like that can be really, really slippery. We used to say, to people who were acting out online, well, just don't go online. You can't do that anymore. So a lot of times just being online is a middle boundary or a middle circle behavior. It's slippery. What a lot of addicts forget to put in their middle boundary is things like arguing with my wife, or arguing with my boss, or feeling lonely, unstructured free time. Oh God, we do not do well with unstructured free time. That is very, very middle boundary for us. It's slippery. It's not, if I have some unstructured free time, I'm not violating my sexual sobriety, but I'm much more in danger of violating my sexual sobriety. If I'm feeling lonely, if I'm feeling bored, if I'm worried about money, or all of these things are really slippery for me, because addiction is not about feeling good, it's about feeling less. We addicts, we don't want to feel emotional discomfort. So any form of emotional discomfort for me has to be in my inner or my middle circle. And then we have the third tier, and this is the tier that I really like. It's called the outer boundary or the outer circle. And these are things that I can do or an addict can do instead of acting out. Going to the movies, hanging out with friends, cleaning the house, painting the house, getting a pet, gardening, spending time with my spouse and kids, and that is a really, really important boundary. Sex addicts tend to spend a lot of time in their addiction. The same is true with alcoholics and drug addicts. I mean, alcoholics spend 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day finding, drinking, being drunk. Finding booze, drinking it, being drunk. Sex addicts are the same way. There was a study that porn addicts look at porn at least 11 or 12 hours a week, and sometimes double or triple or quadruple that amount. We're talking about guys, usually guys, who are looking at porn for 40 hours a week. More than they're at work, they're looking at porn. Those hours have to be filled. And they can't be filled with porn, and they can't be filled with nonstop. Well, they can be filled with nonstop 12-step meetings if you're in the right city. But, we come into recovery to have a life. We don't want recovery to be our life. We come into recovery so we can have a life. And the outer circle is life. The outer boundary is life. It's relationships, it's family, it's hobbies, it's enjoyable activities, so that's what a sexual sobriety plan typically looks like. The other thing I want to add is sexual sobriety plans look different for every person. I'm a 52-year-old single gay man. Trust me, my sexual sobriety plan looks very different than a 35-year-old married father of 4. We have totally different plans, and that's okay. That's kind of the beauty of sexual recovery. It's like an eating disorder. We need to find what's healthy for us, and that differs from person to person. It differs from relationship to relationship. And the partner. And the one last thing I do want to add is, yes, the partner has a say. Just because the addict thinks, well, it's okay if I look at porn once a week for an hour and masturbate. Well, not if your partner doesn't think so. Relationship boundaries are mutual. They're not singular. And that does come into play when we're putting together a sexual sobriety plan. So that's all I've got. And it looks like we have some questions.
We do, but I'm going to tag in on that because for me, I'm alcohol, drugs, and eating disorder. And the eating disorder came after the alcohol and drugs. Although I had tendencies along those ways anyway, but full blown after that, because just like you talked about, don't want to feel, and I didn't have enough coping skills early on in recovery, and so that was my next numbing out. And so we talk about whack-a-mole, where if you don't get to the root of the problem, you're just going to keep finding another. I would have gone through every addiction, because for me, if a little is fine, a lot is better. That's that's just how I. That's my first reaction, is like, 1 square of chocolate, forget it, and like eating disorder, like you said, the alcohol and drugs really easy. Just don't do it. I'm fine, all good. The eating disorder though is, there's a whole bunch of things. Like, I know that if I had a bag of donuts here, that'd be a middle circle. Would it be, out of control? No, but it could lead to behaviors that I don't want, that I no longer wish to engage in. So there are just things that I just don't do because they would cause me to go to a problematic, or spend too much headspace thinking about how I want to eat the entire bag of donuts, but I really don't, so it's just easier not to get the whole bag of donuts. That's just one example. So, but I really like that you shared too, that everybody's plan is different, with alcohol and drugs, really easy. Everybody, it's, 100% abstinence. With this stuff, it's very unique and specific. But I also appreciate that you talked about, if you're in a relationship, there has to be things that you both agree on. So, okay. So first question.
There's a great movie called Thanks for Sharing about sex addicts in recovery. I highly recommend it. one of the characters is played by Josh Gad, and he's fighting to not look at porn one night, so he gets about 20 donuts, and I think they're like the powdered sugar ones, and he like mouths like two of them, and then he throws them away. Then he realizes it's porn or it's donuts, so he digs the donuts out of the trash. And I was sitting in the office going, oh God, I totally get it. I totally get it. So
and on some level, but for me, living in recovery means I'm not, in my opinion, a slave to any of my acting out behaviors. And that's when my gut's not churning. I'm happier with myself. So anything I can do to align with that is helpful. So okay, first question. My SA husband and I are currently seeing the same CSAT therapist. Would it be would it be better for us to see different therapists? I think Scott's face just kind of told his answer. So.
I can only see one of us at a time, but I think I went, eee!
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he did. So I forgot about that. Okay. Well, share your thoughts.
Yeah. The technical term for it is splitting, where a therapist gets split between two clients fighting the same problem. And it's really hard to help one who has certain goals when you're also trying to help the other who has certain goals, and the therapist ends up keeping secrets. And it's often good to have CSAT therapists in the same office who know each other and work well together. But each of you really, it's highly recommended that you have your own therapist.
And I agree. That I'm going to give a caveat. There are a handful of therapists that I know that have done a brilliant job with it, and they say, I'm going to be keeping secrets from both of you at different times. They are very clear on their boundary. You're both going to be mad at me sometimes, and they can navigate it. It is very difficult because therapists are also humans. And so, it can feel like they're aligning with, the other person instead of you. And, and if they're doing couples therapy for the two of you, then the coupleship is the client. And so then they can't, then they shouldn't be your therapist and the other person's therapist and your couple's therapist. I think getting that other perspective, I too like that they work with somebody in the same office or they have a relationship with somebody in town. And from time to time, there's co-therapy. So both therapists and both of you are together, to kind of touch base on the relationship and kind of hold that space. So very few can really do it well. Some think they do it well, and in my previous position, I was the person that dealt with ethical complaints, and it was often around this issue. So if you're asking the question, I kind of wonder if you're already going, this doesn't feel as safe as it should. So, just a thought. Next question. My husband is recovering SA, and I find that he is now using his PlayStation that would have been my eating disorder, to excess, and that is causing the same numbing and escaping. Sure it is, and creating the same problems in our marriage. I don't mean to sound snarky and facetious. I really don't. I just totally understand. And I'm having a hard time convincing him that this video game is doing the same thing to him as a sex addiction was. He is also on this call. So, well, sorry, but we'd love your input. Okay, maybe you wouldn't love my input and Scott's input, but you're going to get it anyway. So, Scott?
Why don't you go first?
Okay, all right. So anything that I do to excess where I am not engaging in life and where my partner has a problem with it is probably a problem. So, I mean, if you are in a relationship, then it's navigating. John Taylor had a webinar earlier today, and we were talking about this specifically. We're talking about navigating the relationship and negotiating the relationship, and how it's both of us sharing our needs and us finding the common space for this. So as a recovering addict, I totally get the wanting to numb out. Scott mentioned, we don't like uncomfortable feelings. For me, all feelings were uncomfortable, even the good ones. I just couldn't cope with them. I was so numbed out that I did not have the framework to be able to go, oh, this is a good feeling and I like it. It was just, I was feeling and I couldn't handle it. So I wanted to escape from all of those, hence the eating disorder. So it was me learning tools. I was diligent in my 12-step program. I did therapy. I did group. I did everything I can. And I'm, I don't run from negative feelings. I don't run from positive feelings. I just know that that's part of being connected to humanity. So to your husband, I want to invite you to join in real life, which includes your relationship. You clearly have somebody who loves you tremendously, who's, stayed with you. I would invite you to look at if there's a different way to do this. Find some common interests. So that's my thoughts. Scott?
Yeah, I would think the partner who wrote this question is probably feeling, on top of relationship betrayal, is now feeling a lack of intimacy, because the addict has now possibly switched addictions to video gaming, which is a legitimate addiction with treatment centers and everything.
Yes.
I'll give you my own tale. I said earlier, alcoholic, drug addict, sex addict. For 2 years, I would get sober in this addiction and I'd take my 30-day chip in a meeting and I'd be all happy, but I'd be smoking dope like a fiend before and after the meeting. And then I'd feel bad about that. So I'd get sober there and I'd start drinking. And then I'd feel bad about that. And, it was just this endless cycle of, whack-a-mole or switching seats on the Titanic. And nothing in my life got better. The ship was still sinking.
Yeah.
It was only when things really completely, totally fell apart, and I was willing to get sober from everything, that my life started to get better. And as Tami said, to rejoin the real world, because that was what I was avoiding.
Yeah, me too. I did not have, I said I didn't get the cookbook with the recipe on how to do life until I got recovery. And then it was, you do this, this, and this. And everybody gets, like we talked about with the 3-circle plan, everybody gets to do, it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, for me, it is living in my integrity, and being completely, I don't engage in any active addictions, okay. Who reviews an addict's sexual circle plan? Sponsor, therapist? That's a question.
Yeah. Yes and yes. Sponsor, therapist, friends in recovery, spouse, if there is one, or partner, if, whatever language you want to use. As sex addicts, we don't get to do our circle plan on our own. We need feedback because we're very adept at lying to ourselves. We're good at lying to other people too, but we're better at lying to ourselves. Well, this is okay because so the more feedback, the better. Absolutely the therapist, absolutely the sponsor, absolutely a therapy group, friends in recovery, and absolutely the partner should have a say.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, next question. Do you have any tips for communicating with ex-partners, friends with benefits, if you will, on starting recovery? I'm a woman, single, sex and love addict, and I'm working on my bottom lines, no casual sex dating apps. How do you recommend I handle when an ex-sexual partner reaches out to me? I'm struggling with just blocking them. I deleted so I don't reach out, but inevitably they pop up. I'm gonna let you answer that one. No, I haven't had to do that specifically.
Yeah,
Ideas, but
exes are part of the addiction. Former acting out partners are acting out partners. That is your addiction calling to you. As an alcoholic, I don't keep alcohol in the house. I don't have my drug dealer on speed dial. I don't need, your drug of choice is people. And some of these people, It's like your dealer calling you up and saying, "Hey, I got a big shipment of cocaine. Do you want some?" And you're going to be triggered out of your mind. You have to block them, and it's hard. And I know that you probably, as a sex and love addict, there's an emotional pull. You know, use the language "friends with benefits," so which would imply you care about these people and would imply they care about you. What I would tell them, or what I would tell you to tell them if they're pushy, is I'm in a 12-step program and you're a problem for me. If you care about me, leave me alone. And the ones who won't leave you alone, guess what? They don't care about you. And the ones who do are respectful people, and maybe someday you can develop a friendship with them again, but not for at least a year. So yeah, pour the alcohol down the drain. It's the same analogy.
And I would challenge you to have accountability about that. If they reach out and if you respond, like Scott said, do a screenshot of your phone and send it to your sponsor so that they know that this is, but have the plan of I agree with blocking them, but if they're if you are going to engage, then make sure you've got and I'm going to respond and I'm going to tell them, and from here on I'm going to block you and I'm sending this to my sponsor, but have that whole plan laid out.
And also have a plan for when they get a different phone and contact you from a different number, what you're going to do then. And that's something you can talk about with your therapist and sponsor. And I've had people do that to me, and I just immediately block them on the new number. I don't even respond. They've already heard from me. They know why I'm not talking to them. It's hard.
Yeah, and this is about you taking care of yourself. And like we talked about the 3-circle plan, or if they're in your I can't deal with these people, then you have to do what you need to do to protect you and your recovery. Okay. Next question. I am new to SA and SLAA. Welcome. I've heard the cravings and obsessions referred to as a hit. What is it about the pleasure centers of the brain that cause us to be stimulated to produce this effect? I've experienced it in times of stress, when I'm overworked, lonely, and tired, and I crave this stimuli. I believe I'm still in the withdrawal phase, but I'm learning to avoid, take a step back, and not pursuing these thoughts, abstinence. But it is tugging, nagging feeling that is intense. Any suggestions to abstain?
I'll address the neurobiology first.
Sure.
All addictions are either to pleasurable substances or pleasurable behaviors. Compulsive hand washing is not an addiction. It's a compulsion. It's not an addiction. Washing your hands is not pleasurable. It's just, checking the stove 100 times. It's OCD. It's not addiction. The brain has a pleasure center. I don't want to get too technical, but when we eat chocolate, it triggers our brain to release some dopamine and adrenaline and oxytocin, and because when we have a nice meal, when we have Thanksgiving dinner, we get pleasure from that, and our brains are set up that way because we need to eat. It's evolution telling us you need to eat regularly. If you don't, you will die. Sex feels good because we need to procreate. If we don't, our species will die. We won't die, but we won't have any kids, and our species will die out. Evolution is really cool that way. And every living being has the same basic pleasure response. It's the animal part of the brain. It gets triggered. And so we do things again. Hanging out with friends is fun. We have pleasure, we do it again. Human beings are better together than apart. There's all kinds of research that proves that. We're better when we're a part of than when we're apart from. We live longer, we're more successful, just everything you can possibly imagine. We're more likely to survive a natural disaster if we don't feel lonely. People who feel lonely are more likely to die in a natural disaster. Go figure. I've lost my train of thought. Addictions. Let's say hanging out with friends gives me 2x dopamine rush. That's a pretty nice hit of dopamine, hanging out with friends. I like doing that. Cocaine will give me 10x, you know, hit after hit after hit of porn video, new person, new sexual act. Ooh, neat. You know, ooh, never seen, you know, risky, you know, the intensity, it's like 10x. It's not a natural reward. We basically, and our brains adapt. Our brain is suddenly used to getting 10 times the normal amount of dopamine. So it stops producing as much dopamine, and it eliminates the dopamine. Doesn't work until the dopamine itself hooks into a dopamine receptor. And there's, you know, let's say there's 1,000 dopamine receptors. Well, if we're constantly bombarding our brain, boom, 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 with hits of cocaine or alcohol or sex or porn or whatever, our brain will stop producing as much dopamine, and at the same time, some of the receptors will just dry up and die because it's getting overloaded. So it adapts. And what happens then is we have trouble enjoying anything, and we end up drinking or using or looking at porn or chasing sex. You've probably all heard the term feeding the beast. That's what feeding the beast is. You're just trying to get back to zero. Screw having a good time. I'm trying to get back to zero. That's and it's just a vicious cycle because you're depressed, so you do something to get out of the depression, and and it screws your brain up even more. It takes about a year for the brain to reset. By the way, your brain is very resilient, but it still takes about a year for everything to kind of get back to normal. Let's see. So craving, though, as Tami and I both talked about earlier, we don't want to feel. So whenever we feel, guess what we want to do? We want to numb out. That's a craving. And that's why, like, a sex addict would have that middle circle. Anything that triggers a craving is probably in the middle circle. Bad day at work, fight with my spouse, kid got an F in school, whatever. Some people go home and eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Some people go home and look at porn for 12 hours. It's the same thing.
So one of the things around is halt, hungry, don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. I added S for stressed. So my little personal one is halts. And I know that those are all triggers for me. If I'm too hungry, if I'm feeling too alone, if I'm too stressed out, then I'm going to look for what can I do to escape this? And it's, whatever addictive, thing is the easiest and the most familiar is what I'm going to want to go back to. So a lot of it, I love that you're saying, I'm learning to avoid, to take a step back and not pursue these thoughts. That is so powerful. And, you say you're early in recovery. That's a major step to take. So yay. And then find some things like so for me, the Serenity Prayer, I was in the 12-step programs, and I would use that as a mantra of understanding that I don't have control over people or circumstances or anything else. All I can do is control my actions and reactions to those, to whatever's going on. And I would say that over and over and over again. And that just kind of helps soothe me and calm me down. But I think whatever you're doing, I had somebody that was, that emailed us and said, I listened to your podcast. I was triggered and I listened to your podcast because I didn't want to relapse. And I was like, well, hallelujah. So, it's like whatever you find that, that is a positive to replace, the negative, that's a good thing. So, going to a meeting, connecting here is awesome. The podcast, we've got webinars and drop-in groups, we've got lots of opportunities, but those are all good things. Like Scott was talking about earlier too, if you're doing something for 40 hours, you got 40 hours to replace, and you need to have positive things that are going to fill it in a meaningful way and not leave you with, the unwanted free time, the danger zone free time. So
this is where your sexual sobriety plan comes into play too. If you filled out your outer boundary or outer circle, whatever you want to call it, thoroughly, I used to carry, I didn't carry my whole plan around. I carried my outer circle around in my wallet so I could pull it out in moments of stress or anxiety or boredom. And I had a whole list of things I could do that were a hell of a lot healthier than what my brain was telling me I wanted to do. Because believe me, my brain wanted me to do things that were not going to be good for me. So, I had that list, and it was literally stuff like, brush your teeth and go to the grocery store and, feed the cat. But it was a bunch of stuff to do instead of acting out. Yeah, there's an old recovery saying, when you're walking through hell, don't stop, keep walking. Do something besides picking up a drink or a drug or acting out.
And with today's technology, like I can have a reminder on my phone, at lunchtime, like to check in and like, how's my day going? What am I thinking? And I can have a reset. Another trick for me was a gratitude plan. If I had to learn this, but I learned that if I could name at least 3 things that I was grateful for, it completely changed my attitude about things. And so I would do gratitude check-ins. And like Scott, this is way before there were smartphones and things like that. I had a piece of paper and I would write down gratitude things and I would look at that. There's one of Scott's gratitudes, Miss Lily. But yeah, there's, if I'm focused on gratitude, if I'm focused on other people, if I'm focused on doing something positive, I'm not likely to be walking through hell and stopping. So, okay, next question. Relating to trust within sex love addiction. During my acting out, there was gaslighting. Numerous events of this is the truth, only to be lying and hiding real truth. What can I do to further provide supportive, trustworthy actions? He has my passwords tracking device on my phone. I attend weekly 12-step meetings and have begun 12-step process. I make every effort to follow through on even the smallest commitments. That's great. So, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a lot of the stuff that you need to be doing. In Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse, which is written for men who've cheated on their wives, but it applies to anybody who's cheated on anybody, he talks a lot about rigorous honesty. And you have to become an open book. You have to be honest. You have to show up on time. If you're going to be late, you have to call. And you have to give up control of your bank account, give up control of your phone, get all this stuff. And it's still you can do everything perfectly, which you won't, because you're a human being and a recovering addict. You can do everything perfectly, and it's still going to take 9 to 18 months before your partner really trusts you again, before you can walk out the door and your partner doesn't look at you like, where are you going? What are you doing? Who are you going to be with? So I would actually pick up a copy of Out of the Doghouse because it has a lot of good suggestions about rebuilding relationship trust. That's really what the whole book is about, is how you rebuild relationship trust after you've committed a betrayal.
Yeah, and I agree, and it takes time, and you own that there was gaslighting and this is the truth, and so it's hard for a partner to turn that around and go, now they told me that before, but one of the things we talk to partners about is trusting your gut, and it's hard to trust that initially. But while there was gaslighting going on, there was all this doesn't feel right. They're telling me this is right, but this doesn't feel right. And so I have seen, and I believe that partners start understanding that they can trust their gut and that what they are hearing from you is the truth, but it just takes time. So, but you're doing good things. I agree with getting a copy of Out of the Doghouse. I think there will be some practical tools in there as well. So,
yeah, for those who don't know, gaslighting is essentially denying your partner's reality to the point where they question their own sanity. And it's a really brutal thing to do to somebody. And somebody who's been gaslighted is going to need a lot of time and TLC to get over that.
Yeah. And, you know, and Rob has talked about, you know, on this forum as well, is like, you know, the partner's entitled to be angry and, you know, like all of their feelings are genuine. And as an addict, we can't go, well, I've been in recovery for 3 weeks now. You should get over it. I mean, that, you know, that is not going to be helpful or useful to the relationship at all. So, okay, next question. Should an SA husband tell his wife when he has had a slip and acts out? I feel like if he doesn't, it's because he wants to continue to get away with it. Scott?
Well, your wife, I'm going to let you answer that one first.
I just want to clarify, my husband is not, he's, I don't know how he's normal. He can leave beer in the bottom of a glass. I have no concept, but, so as an addict, I'm going to tell you, yes. Like, and part of the plan I think part of the 3-circle plan should be, if you've, you know, gone into those other circles, there needs to be accountability. You know, how can you build trust within a relationship if, well, I'll tell you about this because you won't get mad, or, you know, I can, you know, whatever, but this I'm not going to tell you about. So yeah, I mean, part of living a life of integrity, part of living in recovery is that we own up when we make mistakes. You know, part of the 12-step recovery, I don't know if, you know, you say he's a sex addict. I don't know if he's going to 12-step meetings, but if he is, part of it is we make amends. And it isn't just like, oh, I slipped up, you know, you need to forgive me. It's like, I make amends by living differently. And you know, okay, what was the trigger? What was he not doing? You know, was he not going to meetings? Was he not, you know, seeing his therapist? You know, there are some pretty specific things that if I'm going to my meetings, I'm talking to my sponsor, you know, I'm going to my therapist, you know, and I've got this, I'm reading some recovery literature, and I've got these things packed in over the course of the week, you know, I'm pretty much focused on recovery rather than focused on my acting out. So there was a point, you know, at some point he would have decided to act out. So there was a trigger, there was a something. So figuring out, you know, how to not have that happen again. But in my opinion, it's, yes, you have to be accountable for your behaviors. Like a disclosure, doesn't need all the gory details, you know, but, you know, I looked at porn, I called an affair partner, I did whatever it was, you know, and I think you deserve, you know, and if there's, you know, if he had sex and it was unprotected, you absolutely need to know that, so that, you you need to get tested. So, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, if a sex addict wants to rebuild trust, it starts with rigorous honesty. And rigorous honesty means tell the truth all the time and tell it faster, even when it's hard and might hurt the person you have to tell it to. If you can't do that, your relationship is never going to get well. Now I'll talk a little bit about slips and relapse. Rob and I use the same definition of slip and the same definition of relapse. A slip is, you know, I stick my toe into my inner circle and I get honest about it right away with all the people who need to know. My sponsor knows, my therapist knows, my friends in recovery know, and most of all, my partner knows if I happen to have one. A relapse is slip plus secrecy. That's relapse. Because if you don't tell, if you don't come clean, guess what's going to happen? You know, oh, I had a sip of beer. It didn't do anything to me and nobody knows. Well, this time I'll have a whole beer. Tomorrow I'll have a whole case. You know, that's how it goes. That's how addiction works. You know, again, another stupid recovery saying, but, you know, while we're getting sober, our addiction is hiding in the dark, doing push-ups and getting stronger. And I don't know anybody who's ever relapsed who didn't end up worse than they were before they went to recovery in the first place. You know, you think you hit your bottom the first time, guess what? You just wait. You know, you go on a full-blown relapse, you just wait and see what your bottom really looks like, because it gets ugly. So yes, please get honest. And yeah, it's not going to be a pleasant conversation, but yes, you as part of your recovery, And as part of rebuilding your relationship, yes, you gotta tell. You don't have to give the gory details, but you have to talk about it.
Yeah,
If you just think about doing it, that's not a slip. If you think about doing it and don't, talk to your sponsor, talk to your friends in recovery. You don't need to tell your wife or husband or whatever. If you actually do it, yeah, you got to fess up.
yeah, I totally agree. So, okay. Now this one's more of a comment, but I wanted to comment on it. So don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed. That's a great point. This person relapsed with an ex after I burned out from a work conference and a whole bunch of other stuff. Had no strength to deal with the trigger, working on getting back on track. And that's exactly where we get into trouble. If we have too much free time or we've burned ourselves out too much, it's like finding balance, which was one of those things I had zero of. I said I was like this giant pendulum that swang, and now I'm like this, but I was way in one extreme or another. And so, so for me, finding the balance of what's, good for me. I had a hugely busy day today, and at 4:30 my time, I'm in Arizona, I was like, I'm going to the gym. There was a class I wanted to go to, and I thought, I don't have time for it. And I thought, I don't have time not to do this. I needed to do that for myself. And that was just part of my taking care of myself in that moment. But, I find that I need to plan self-care things into my calendar so that I get them done and make them a priority. And because there's always the pull. Somebody's, like you said, families, all this stuff, it's always a pull. But I need to make sure that me and my recovery is a priority. So I'd invite you to reprioritize.
Addicts are notoriously bad at self-care because we've been numbing out, most of us, for so long that we don't even know what our needs are anymore. And a lot of times our partners get dragged into that. They don't know what their needs are either because they're so busy trying to keep us from blowing the house up, that they don't get to focus on themselves either. So yeah, when an individual or a couple gets into recovery, self-care has to become a priority. Tami nailed it. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Is there an outer circle or similar support for SA survivor? I'm thinking that sex abuse survivor. We are focused on recovery and have gone no contact with the SA, yeah, but do not know the steps to take when we are being hoovered. Do we alert common friends or concentrate only on our own healing? So thoughts on that? I don't know about it. So like, I'm thinking you're a trauma survivor. I mean, so I don't know that I think it's setting boundaries, but I don't know if there's circle plan necessarily. Although I could make a case for it as well, like this is my really good boundaries. If they're contacting me, that would be a middle circle, but I do think concentrating on your own healing and like Scott said before, it's like having a community and being connected with healthy people are keys to helping you heal and make things different. So Scott, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there are I'm not sure if this is about sex addiction or sex abuse, and I don't know what being hoovered is, except I know where my head goes, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. Whether it's sex addiction or sexual abuse, there are support groups for partners of sex addicts, and there are support groups, some wonderful support groups for sex abuse survivors. Yeah, and if it's sex abuse, yeah, no contact. Great. As far as, is there an outer circle or similar support? I don't see why there shouldn't be. I've only heard boundary plans or circle plans applied to sex addiction, but I have sponsees in other programs, and I kind of say, hey, what do you do for fun? What do you do instead of drinking? What do you do instead of using? because I want them to have something they can turn to, in difficult times. As far as alerting common friends, I don't know what the alert would be about. If it's sex abuse, like, hey, you need to know about this person and keep your kids away from them or whatever. Yeah. If they have, if somebody's in danger, you need to tell them. Addiction, that's more, if you're partnered with a sex addict, that's much more of a private decision that you have to make and decide what you're comfortable with. But if somebody's in danger, it doesn't matter if you're comfortable or not, you have to tell them.
Okay, next question. I compulsively think about sex 24/7. It completely consumes my thoughts and it interrupts my thought process even when I'm at work. I compulsively masturbate, especially when I am depressed. However, I don't act upon these fantasies unless I am in a relationship. The reason for this is because my pleasure trigger only hits when with someone I really like. Am I a sex addict?
The criteria used to diagnose sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is the official diagnosis, basically boils down to preoccupied to the point of obsession, which sounds like you are, a loss of control, which is generally evidenced by failed attempts to quit or cut back. The fact that you're here tells me you've tried on your own to quit and cut back. And then the third one is consequences. And everybody thinks, oh, well, I haven't been arrested. I still have my job. Well, sounds like you're not in a relationship right now. That might be a consequence. Sounds like you have an issue with depression. That might be a consequence. Consequences can be a little more subtle than people think about. There's no way Tami or I, or even Dr. Rob, if he was on today, could diagnose you as a sex addict just from a question online. But I would suggest you might want to contact a CSAT, a certified sex addiction therapist. You can email us and we can make a recommendation, or you can usually find them in your area pretty easily, especially in a big city. I don't know where you are. But yeah, and go in and let them do a fuller evaluation, or go sit in on some Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings, and see if it resonates. That's what a lot of people do. They just go to a couple meetings and think, oh, I'm in the right spot. You hear other people talking about their lives and what they do and what they've been through. One of the interesting things about sex addiction, especially in the digital age, is a lot of sex addicts don't have very much actual sex with another human being. I see particularly younger men coming in and they've never had sex with another person, but they're sexual 12 hours a day. They're online, they're looking at porn, they're masturbating, they're, webcams, all kinds of things. So yeah, it's worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think when you say I compulsively think about it and it completely consumes my thoughts, I compulsively masturbate, masturbation is normal, healthy, whatever, but if you're compulsively doing it, you feel like you don't have an option not to do that. I mean, that's how addictive behavior is. So again, neither of us can diagnose you, but there is a self-assessment on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. You may want to take that. For me, it's living in, like I said before, living in the real world, having connections with people. And, there's not one behavior that I compulsively have to do. I want my behaviors to be choices. So, I want to be connected with people. So I would invite you to explore this and see if there's, there might be a 12-step meeting that resonates with you. So next question, is there ever a chance of recovery fatigue? I go to recovery meetings, attend a fair recovery class weekly, take several weekly SA calls weekly, and I'm reading a few books of shame, addiction, etc. Sometimes I just feel so burned out that I feel guilty for taking a nap or checking out and watching TV.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. That's a real thing. Rob has a whole chapter on it in his book, Sex Addiction 101. It's after it's near the end of the book, and I think it's called From Shame to Grace is the chapter. And what it talks about is a client of his who was experiencing recovery fatigue. You know, his whole life had become about recovery, and he was doing everything right, and he was just tired, and he was getting depressed. And so Rob talked to him and said, well, you know, let's see your, you know, outer circle. Let's go through it. So they went through it, and everything was related to recovery. You know, instead of acting out, I'll go to meetings. I'll call my sponsor. I'll read you know, the green book. I'll do this. I'll do. And there was nothing about hobbies or hanging out with friends or going to a ball game or even exercising or going to. It was all recovery, 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 recovery. My friend Steve says you have to take a break and sharpen the saw. I think it's a Stephen Covey or whatever. What's his name? Steve's in the room with me. Stephen Covey. He's kind of an efficiency expert. You know, it's more about business, but if you don't take time and sharpen your saw is going to get very dull, and it's going to be really hard to cut down the trees you're trying to cut down. And it's the same with recovery. You have to give yourself a break, have some fun, play cards with your friends, whatever.
And I agree. I have a lot of recovery friends, and I have activities within recovery. And when I first started, like I was social with all recovery people, et cetera. But now my circle is a lot wider. I have a lot of healthy people who, you know, who aren't addicts. I can't think of anybody who's an active addict that I'm, you know, hanging around. I obviously with any kind of degree of time. So yeah, I mean, there's lots out there. You know, I do other things and, you know, have fun in many healthy ways. Yes, go do something fun, not specifically for recovery purposes.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we don't come to recovery so recovery can become our life. We come to recovery so we can have a life. So please have a life.
Yes. So to the question about being hoovered is like a vacuum. I wondered about that. Narcissists and toxic people do manipulative tactics to try and get their ex-partner back. And that's true. Okay. So the next question. My husband has been an SA since the age of 16. His drug of choice is porn. His addiction has surfaced and been discovered at intervals throughout our 39-year marriage. When he is using, he becomes testy and abusive, sometimes extremely violent towards me. He often dissociates when raging and doesn't remember what he says or does. When I have made discoveries, he will leave evidence like leaving his iPad open to a XXX cam site, or a DVD will be left on the TV. And he tells me he's clean. I have been duped too many times. He often says he doesn't go there for sex. In fact, he says that repulses him and he barely watches because he only turns it on when he's completely tanked depressed. I know he sets up the situation as hopeless to give himself permission to use, as if helpless to prevent the relapse. He often says he has no memory of his actions. The latest story is he has no memory of the store where he purchased his latest DVD. He's made that store. Well, anyway, so thoughts?
What's your initial reaction?
Well, I'm, you know, like it sounds like, I mean, has he been tested for clinical depression? You know, like there's, you know, when he's completely tanked, depressed. You know, depression was brought up a couple different times. You know, if he's clinically depressed, and he's looking to me, and I don't know which is coming first. If he's depressed because he's withdrawing from this, I don't know. It doesn't sound like he's withdrawing. But you know, if he's having dissociative times and he's clinically depressed, I'm thinking, you know, a psychiatrist might be the answer. What do you think?
I wanted you to answer first because, of course, my initial reaction is bullshit.
I know, I thought that too, but I was like, you know, yeah.
But it is possible that you know, he has a dissociative disorder. There are reasons people don't remember things. It could be trauma-based. There could be a lot of reasons. So that does need to be delved into in a professional therapy setting. But most likely bullshit. You know, very few people truly don't remember their actions, and they're deeply disturbed, and usually not wandering the streets. They're usually jails, institutions, or death is what happens to people who have that kind of very, very, very serious mental illness. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to set boundaries with somebody who who does things like that, that are, lying and keeping secrets, and then kind of abusively leaving evidence out for you to find, and then denying it and telling you stories. It's very hard to set boundaries with somebody like that. You have to figure out what you're willing to live with and what you're not willing to put up with. But I would encourage you to go to your own therapist who deals in these issues. And I would encourage you to encourage him to go to a therapist to see what's really going on with him.
And get a psychiatric evaluation. If he's clinically depressed, there are meds for that, and that can change things. So a couple more questions, and then don't anybody else add. We're going to run out of time. We're going to answer. There's 3 more left, and we'll answer them quickly. Is journaling an absolute must when it comes to SA recovery? Because my husband isn't really into the whole journaling thing, and I feel like it's really hard. He has a hard time with feelings. Absolutely. If you read the journals, which it sounds like you are reading them, I hope that you had permission to read them. Otherwise, that's a whole nother boundary thing. If you read the journals, he has tried to write. He writes more about what he is dealing with, or how his wife, is reacting to him, and he hasn't really gotten into deep parts of what his feelings and unmet needs are and why. So this is going to be interesting because Scott is a writer and I am not. So I did not journal in my recovery. I tried. I found one journal that I started writing, and it's just like, so it was not useful for me. That was not part of my journey. Now, Scott, he's an awesome writer. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, first of all, for the compliment. I journaled a lot early in recovery, but I was not writing. Trust me, I was not writing about my feelings. I could not deal with feelings. And when I finally got some sobriety, my feelings were completely out of control because I started drinking in middle school and never stopped. And my other addictions came pretty much on the heels of that. So I never learned how to deal with feelings. I would cry at a Hallmark commercial. I would try to get somebody fired because they put mayonnaise on my hamburger. I don't like mayonnaise. So yeah, men, especially in recovery, it takes us a while to come around and feel things. So journaling, yes, no, depends on what he's comfortable with, but he needs to at least talk to somebody and work toward feeling his feelings.
Yeah, and it is really hard because and I've shared this before. I remember going, somebody said, "What are you feeling?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm just feeling," and I hated it. So it's very hard. But she did chime in that she does have permission to read it, so that's great. Okay, next question. And a couple of years ago, my husband's therapist wanted him to go to inpatient treatment for sex addiction. The therapist researched options. Husband refused. He didn't see the need for inpatient, would not pay for it, too expensive. That's just one excuse. He eventually rejected outpatient therapy as well. He doesn't see himself as one of those people, and he can handle it on his own. He still handles it on his own, won't go to 12-step program either. He lives in his head to the max. Fantasy is his life: fantasy football, baseball, TV, books on tape, etc. His hobbies are all cerebral and require no one else to participate. He has been told by many therapists to get a life, but no luck to date. So to this I say, if you've done everything. So then what Scott said to the person earlier, it's like, go talk to your support therapist and lay this all out. And, I don't know what your options are. I don't know what you're considering, but, this is one of those, if this is how he's going to be, and this is the best he's going to be, is that, and then maybe, is that, are you okay with that? Because if it is, and you've got a whole life of your own outside of that, then great. You can come together on some level. But if this is bothering you, then then options are, if he's unwilling to change, this
is something we can't really give you a huge amount of advice here because we don't know the whole situation. But I feel the pain of being in a relationship with somebody who's giving you no vulnerability or intimacy. I like Tami, I would encourage you to talk to a therapist, talk to your, if you have empathetic, trusted friends, talk to them, get some feedback. Don't go through this alone.
Okay, final question, and this is a great one too. My SA husband is in therapy and tried one SAA meeting and didn't feel like people there were like him. What is your opinion on recovery without any meetings? Is it realistic? I'm especially concerned because there's only one appointment left, no appointments this week and one next week before the therapist is off for the holidays and we've got the new year. And it's a fragile time for addicts. You're exactly right. So when people are encouraged to go to meetings, they're told to go to multiples. And if you have the luxury of having different meetings like SA, SLA, SA, or like there's a Monday meeting and a Wednesday meeting, go to the different ones because every 12-step meeting has its own little personality. And it's really easy to sit down in the chair and cross your arms and go, these people are not like me. But if you're there and you decide to be open-minded about it, you will find points where you go, I can relate to that. So my goal when I go to meetings is to find where I connect with people rather than how I'm different than them. And that makes a whole lot of difference. Is recovery without meetings possible? Sure, there are people that don't go to meetings. There are also online meetings where you can connect. I think it's harder. And I think especially if you're not finding ways, Scott talked about it, like we need to attach. We are detached, and so we need to find healthy ways of attaching. And if he's not doing anything to attach to healthy people, recovering people, then it's going to be more challenging. But is it impossible? No. It's also about the quality of recovery. There are the people that dig their little nails in and go, hang in there, and then there's the other people that engage with recovery and I think really find healing. So it's kind of, what does he want? So, and it may take a relapse before he goes, okay, that didn't work. So.
I have two friends, they're brothers, unknown to each other. They both got sober on the same day.
Oh, that's crazy.
40 years ago, Valentine's Day, it'll be 40 years on Valentine's Day. One of them goes to meetings regularly. One of them went to a couple meetings and never went back, but hasn't drank. Guess which one people like to be around?
The one that goes to meetings.
Yes. The other one's what we call a dry drunk. He's a full-blown alcoholic without the alcohol. And that's just a really mean son of a bitch. And every meeting is different. And there are meetings I hate and you couldn't drag me to them. But there are other meetings that I won't miss for anything because I love them and my friends are there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even like my best meeting, every now and then either I'm off or the topic doesn't resonate, and that's okay. I'm still sitting in a meeting and I can pick up something if I choose to want to. So like I can go, this is the best meeting ever, or I can go, meh, but I was at a meeting and I was doing something positive for my recovery. So I'm going to remind you, I started talking a little bit before the meeting started, there are drop-in groups and webinars. If you haven't already registered on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, please do so. You'll get the emails and notices with the different things. We're adding more drop-in groups. So there will be more options to connect, including over the holidays. So for those of you that are worried about the holidays, we're still going to be around. So Dr. Rob will be back next week. Thank you, Scott, for he got a text a half an hour before the meeting going, can you join me? So thank you.
I was at the grocery store.
I was at the gym. So
tomorrow, if anybody speaks Spanish, there's a Spanish language webinar at noon, and then on Wednesday, is it Kristen or Brittany at noon?
Brittany's doing the partner drop-in group, and then David's doing his webinar. So
yeah, David Fawcett, Dr. David Fawcett. If anybody has questions about neurobiology, he is the guy to ask. So tune in Wednesday at 5.
Yeah. He did one on resiliency. The first night I did one with him, it was brilliant. I learned a lot. So always good to learn. So thank you all. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.